Are you having trouble with 1/4-inch seams? Keep watching. I have 10 tips for you to put together a better quilt top. Hi, I'm Roberta from Quilt Crafters Corner. Today we're going to talk about 1/4-inch seams. Now, I came from a background of sewing clothes, so I was used to a 5/8 of an inch seam. So a 1/4-inch seam took me a long time to get really good at. So let's talk about that 1/4-inch seam and the scant 1/4-inch seam. So what that means is a scant 1/4-inch is 1 or 2 threads less than a 1/4 inch. And why that is because when you go to fold your fabric over that seam, you're going to lose 1 or 2 threads. So it's really important that you press your seams to make sure you meld that thread into the fabric. So when you fold over the fabric and press, you're going to get a nice flat, and you're not going to lose a lot of fabric. It's going to fold right over and it's going to be flat. I have 10 tips for you in order to get better 1/4-inch seam. So let's take a look at that. So my first tip for you is check your seams. And what I've got here is 2.5-inch strips that I have left over from another project. And I'll take my ruler and I will just lay it on the seam itself and check to make sure that they're all 2 inches apart. And that will tell me if I'm getting a good 1/4-inch seam. Now the outsides are still going to have that extra 1/4 inch on each side, so you need to make sure that you have some inside strips to measure and make sure that they're 2 inches. That's an easy way to see if you're getting a good 1/4-inch seam. Now some machines you can adjust your needle just a tiny bit in order to get that perfect 1/4-inch seam. My machine doesn't have it. I just have a center left and right. So it's a little bit harder for me to move the needle just enough to get that. But some machines do have that, and it's a nice feature. The next thing is your throat plate. Make sure that you have your single hole throat plate in your machine. Some are zigzag, which is a long oval shape, and then the single hole is it's really for a straight seam, and it's a nice way to get a good 1/4-inch seam. Tip number 4 is leaders and enders. So when I'm sewing, I always start with scraps of fabric and I just sew them through. And what this does is it makes it a consistent seam. You're constantly sewing. So I will sew one through and then I'll sew my seam and then I'll put another one through and I'll go halfway or most of the way. And then that way it's just a consistent seam and it just seems to work better. So leaders and enders are really good things to start and end your seams. Tip number 5 is my 1/4-inch seam foot. And as you can see, it has this nice little guide here, and this guide, the material just rests right along that, and I just keep it on there. And this gives me a nice 1/4-inch seam. So it's easy to use this. Now these, you can get them without that guide, where it's just the 2 parts of the foot or sides, and you just ride the material along that edge. But I like this guide because the material just rides along it really nicely. Now there's several products out there that are available for you to buy. One is a purple Q tool, and what it is it's a strip of purple vinyl that you can place down on your sewing machine bed and use that for your material to guide along. And the nice thing about that is it's removable. If you have a top-loading bobbin the Q tool is a really nice thing. The other thing you can use is multiple layers of masking tape. Now I usually use painter's tape, but if you have a top loading bobbin, masking tape isn't always a good solution. That's why the Q tool, the purple Q tool, works really well, because you can lift it up, change your bobbin, and just put it back down, you know, measure and put it back down, and it works really, really well. The next thing is aligning your raw edges. So when I'm talking about aligning your raw edges, I'm talking about getting these lined up so that everything is nice and straight, and I check from front and back to make sure that I've got everything lined up. And then take your pins and pin and make sure that you've got all your sides lined up, so you're going to get a nice square and a 1/4 inch seam. The other thing is, make sure you put your pin in the end of it, and this is important because as this is being fed through the machine, this side of the material, the actual, or right on the left side of the seam, the 1/4 inch seam, is the feed dogs, and it's pulling the fabric through. And over on the right side of the edge of your fabric, it's just off of the feed dogs, so it's pulling this way. It wants to pull this way. So that's why it's really important to hold on to the end of your project and feed it through directly straight through. Tip number 8 is pressing seams to set them. Now, what do I mean by pressing seams? And this is where you take your iron and press directly straight down. Don't move your iron, you just want to press. And like I said, this is to meld that thread into the fabric, so that when you go to open this up and you press again, you're going to press a nice flat seam. And this is going to help when you start to put projects together. Tip number 9 is draw lines. Now, there are several cases where I have had to draw 1/4 inch lines. And what I do is I use my ruler and I use my 1/4 inch line that's a dashed dotted line. And so I just place that right off of the material's edge. That way I know when I go to put a line in with my air erase pen that it's going to be a scant 1/4 inch. And then what I'll do is I'll sew right along that line. And this is really nice to do if you need to get everything lined up just right, is to draw a line. It works really, really well. Tip number 10 is to rethread your machine and your bobbin. Sometimes lint will get into those tension discs, and just pulling the thread out and then rethreading your machine and your bobbin, there's a tension on your bobbin also, is rethread that tension, into those tension discs, and sometimes that is enough to get a better 1/4 inch seam. So those are my 10 tips for getting a really good 1/4 inch seam. If you like this video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you'd like to join a group of like-minded quilters, come join Quilter Swarm. It's a private Facebook group. Just answer the questions and you'll get in. I want to thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.